Okay, I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining me today for this, which is the very first session of our brand new webinar series. My name is Alan Mourgues. I'm a consulting reservoir engineer based here in Australia, and I'm the founder of CrowdField, an oil and gas freelancer community, and I'm also the co-founder of GeoDataX, an AI-powered RAG solution for oil and gas data retrieval. I'm not going to bore you with promoting these, but if you're interested, you can learn more about them in my LinkedIn feed and in my websites. So, to motivate today's talk, picture this scenario. I'm sure you all know how this goes. The geo runs volumetrics, right? They hand over the model to the RE, and you know what happens next. The volume inevitably is going to be either too small or too big. And they start throwing in some poor volume multipliers and other tweaks, right? So by the end, the history match model is nothing like the original. You've all been there, right? So today, we're going to actually go back and talk about uncertainty in resource estimation. Now, the title for today's talk is Uncertainty in Resource Estimation, the Gross Rock Volume, GRV. Now, let me actually turn off my camera to save some bandwidth and go to the slides. And our presenter today is Alessandro Mannini. You've already read his bio already, so I'm not going to spend time reading through it, but suffice to say that he brings a wealth of experience in both subsurface and in AI and advanced quantitative analysis. I actually first met Alessandro when he was leading the digital transformation team at Santos, one of the majors here in Australia. So I'm really thankful and honored to have him with us today to help me launch this expert series. Now, Alessandro's mission today is to convince you that geostatistics is the way to go. That's his goal. But before we dive into it, let me just do a bit of housekeeping. We've budgeted about 40 to 45 minutes for the talk, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. Please stay muted throughout the session, and if you'd like to ask a question at the end, you can either raise your hand using that little hand icon you see at the bottom of your screen and wait for my cue before unmuting yourself, or you can simply type your question in the chat and we'll read it aloud, go over them as time permits. Okay? Now, this session is being recorded for later distribution. And finally, do stick around because there's a bonus at the end of the session only for attendees. All right, so we're all good to go. Give me just a sec to enable screen sharing and take it away, Alessandra. You are good to go. Yeah, you're good to go. Take it away, mate. Perfect. We can see your screen, Alessandra. All good. You just need to unmute yourself.
Here we are. Alan, thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone who decided to spend an hour with us today. I'm delighted to be here and to try to convince you that geostatistics might be a useful tool to have in your toolkit to access at least GRV problems. In general, geostatistics, we will see through the presentation that is a powerful tool that it can be useful in many other situations, but for the time being, we will just focus on GRV. Let me just allow 1 second, because here we are. Now, today, I haven't rehearsed the presentation, but I will do my best to stick to the 30 40 minutes. And what I would really like to share with you is summarizing this agenda. First of all, I will try to explain why it's important that we carefully treat the structural uncertainty, or the GRV. So fundamentally, we have to be good at assessing the container of our hydrocarbons. Then I will try to explain why geostatistics is designed to solve a problem with deconversion and volumetric assessment. And then I will try to explain the benefit of implementing geostatistics throughout our workflow for GRV calculation. Then I will, toward the end, I will try to introduce a little bit of a more transformative concept, and I will try to analyze why we are going to do this, or why we have the possibility to do this from the lenses of decision analysis. And then I will share a real world case study with you, and you will see toward the end that is a bit peculiar, and I don't want to spoil the surprise. So let's start with a title, A Tale of Underestimation. Why? First of all, allow me to introduce myself. Alan has been so kind to introduce myself with a slide. Fundamentally, and that is, I say with a very heavy heart, I'm old or relatively old, and I've been around for very long, or relatively very long. So my background is in geoscience. I'm a geologist by background, and as you can see in this slide, I've been around in working for different companies in different roles, going from development manager to the quantitative interpretation director of one of the greatest and the biggest team in oil and gas in Petronas. Then I moved back to exploration, and finally, the last job before joining as a CEO Seisquare was as advisor to the EVP of Santos, subsurface of Santos, in my capacity of transformation manager. Now, let's dwell on the fundamental question of why we are going through this presentation. Now, we all know that we are here and we work either directly because we want to make money, or because we work for oil and gas company that they have their clear goal to increase the value for the shareholder and through making some money. Now, during this process, there are several questions, but they can boil down to the fundamental four, in particular if we are talking from a subsurface point of view. Now, the first question is how much volume we have and and where we should drill to extract that. Because if you know these things better than I do, if we have a precise and accurate handling on the volumes that we can produce, we can understand our revenue, and therefore we can understand everything else that is around making money out of our business. If we dwell a little bit on the geophysical aspect and the drilling aspect that is connected to the geophysical information, we also need to know how depth, at which depth our horizon, our reservoir is, and fundamentally, because we are in a game of taking decision, we need to understand the risk that we want to take in order to go after that volumes. Now, this is the first problem that we are facing is usually we take decision based on information that come from 3D model. We are probably all familiar with this process, but one thing that I would really like to stress is very simple. We have some data, the well data that are in depth. We build our 3D model in depth, but fundamentally the biggest contributor of our knowledge comes from seismic, which is acquiring time. So usually, and we will see later on, that it lead to a lot of value destruction or potentially value destruction. We do know that this process might be oversimplified. We tend to have a simple approach of multiplying velocity as they are, multiply the time of our interpretation, we calibrate, and we are all happy with what we have achieved. Now, one thing that I would really like to stress and use this slide to introduce the next one, where I will try to make clear why GRV calculation is very important. We do know that in the last 20 or 30 years, perhaps even more, if we go back to the first 3D that was acquired probably 40 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, we have had a lot of improvement in the way that we analyze geophysical data and the way that we use for de-risking our project. We know that we have had a lot of improvement in the seismic domain. We are now using full waveform inversion very often, and we are approaching an era where probably we can directly process the seismic for property of the rocks. Now we already have, in the last 10 years, we have seen how fundamentally our business, our interpretation approach can be changed using machine learning and AI more in general. We have seen a lot of improvement in the way that we handle rock physics information for reservoir characterization. So overall, we have taken a long journey that has enhanced our ability to discriminate and characterize our hydrocarbon accumulation. Now, there is a problem. Even in light of this improvement, we are still making a lot of mistakes. Some are related because simply we explore where hydrocarbon are not formed, but most of the time, and then the next slide will try to explain this concept, very often we neglect some aspect of our characterization. And in my experience, one of the aspect that we are not paying enough attention to is the structural uncertainty. So we usually use a too simplify approach to the calculation of our container. Now, if you have to walk away with a few concepts, please try to remember these slides. Now, as you might have seen in my introduction, I have been lucky to be the development manager for a field that is called Johan Sverdrup. Johan Sverdrup is one of the biggest discoveries ever made in Norway, definitely the biggest in the last 35 years. And we are talking about 2.5 billion recoverable barrel, of course, and we are talking about a plateau 500,000 barrel production. Okay. Now, I was involved at the end of the exploration through the appraisal, and the aim of my activity was to finalize the FEED for this field. So every time, and we will see this a few times over the presentation, every time that you need to take a decision, you need to have optionality. And the optionality comes from the assessment of the uncertainty usually. Now, if you can see on the left-hand side, I hope that you can see my point. On the left-hand side is a classical tornado plot that let us understand that the structure component, the GRV, was the biggest uncertainty, or better, the part of the flow, the workflow that bear the biggest uncertainties. So this is not new to me. I have seen this in many instances. So the first key message that I would like to share and for you to remember is usually GRV, if you don't know why you cannot match your production information with your volumetric coming from the static evaluation, GRV is probably the first thing that you should have a look. It's not always the case, but very often it is. Now, let's assume that you are in this situation and you are the geophysicist working on the project and you are given the task to capture this uncertainty. On the right-hand side, you can see a lot of dots. These dots are simply deterministic deconversion that at the time I basically evaluated. Now, the first challenge is if you want to capture one distribution using a deterministic approach, you don't know how many deterministic run you have to run. So in this case, what you can see is you can see a lot of deterministic attempt. If I'm not mistaken, there are 54. But the challenge was at the time to understand when to stop. Were 20 enough? Were 25 enough? There were 100 enough? You just don't know. And usually what you do, you just perform one and then you start tweaking with the parameters. Now, so the second key point that I would like, the key information that I would like you to remember is it's very difficult to sample a distribution if you don't know the distribution itself. And the distribution here is captured by this three arrow in terms of P90, P50, and P10. Now, the last key point that I would really like to share with you as far as this slide is concerned, as you can see, when we start with a single best deterministic case, we were on the high side of the estimation. And then also another very important factor to remember is, let's assume that now, even if you know the distribution, or better, let's assume that you do not know the distribution. You are given out of your task is to pick 3 deterministic cases. How do you know what you pick? You might pick 3 around the P90, the P10, around the P90, or somewhere, but the point that I would really like to share with you is, without an understanding of the distribution that can come only from geostatistics, if it's very difficult to sample an unknown distribution. And the likelihood in this case is that you end up overestimating your uncertainty. Now, I really like to work with an integrated team because, I think at the end of the day, things has to make sense. And usually they make sense if they make money. Now, fundamentally, if you pick, in this case, a 3 deterministic case, too optimistic, you will end up overestimating your volumetric, and probably you will overestimate the size of your facility. If you are thinking that in this case, the investment for drilling and facility was beyond 2 billion American dollar, you can immediately see the impact that this any mistake in capturing the uncertainty in GRV could have had. Now, in short, I have nothing against a deterministic solution, but usually they are not able to capture the uncertainty. We have seen that if you want to take decision, you need to capture the uncertainty, and in particular, in addition to that, if you use multi-deterministic approach, you need to be able to understand the distribution that you want to sample. All of this can be solved by geostatistics, and we will shortly see how I would recommend to do this. Now, again, dollars. We do this for dollars, and I have decided to share with you a couple of examples. I owe you an apology because I was planning to share with you something at the very beginning of the presentation. The thing that I wanted to share is very simple. This is a technical presentation. You will see Udemy and Seisquare popping up here and there, but the intention is not just to make an advertisement for them. It's just because I work for this company. If you have another way to leverage the benefit of geostatistics, is absolutely fine. You have to remember that today we will just focus on the technical aspect of the improvement that geostatistics can bring on the table. So here we have, having said that, let's go back to the presentation. I would like to share with you very briefly 2 examples where we use advanced geostatistical approach to GRV calculation. We had 2 cases, a development drilling in Southeast Asia. We had some problem. I won't dwell on the detail, but fundamentally what happened is, using a geostatistical approach, we immediately understood that 2 or 3 wells that were already drilled in the past had a very low probability to be inside the structure. If we had used that approach before, probably we would have avoided to drill such wells, and therefore we would probably have saved a lot of money. Another example, in the Cooper Basin, an exploration license, it was pretty dead. We were looking to understand the distribution of traps and the thickness and the average thickness of potential hydrocarbon traps. And fundamentally, using geostatistics, again, we had the ability to have a informative approach to the decision, and we were able to refresh the exploration approach, which led to some success, and therefore the increase of revenue for the company. So far, I have tried to explain where the problem is. Now I will try to share a little bit of the solution to such a problem. Now, first of all, I would like to tell you that in the interest of time, I will just scratch the surface of the problem. In general, geostatistics, if you want to understand to a certain level geostatistics, you need to spend time. It's not rocket science, but in 5 minutes, I will be able only to share some information without being able to articulate why such information, where they are coming from fundamentally. So this is one of the greatest mind of our time is Professor George Materon, is the founder is the father of geostatistics, and we will see in a few minutes how his ability to demonstrate that the concept of regionalized variable led to the development of geostatistics. So when we are talking about geostatistics is nothing more than a class of statistics used to analyze and predict the value associated with spatial variables. Now, why Materon was very, very, very successful? Materon, realizing the significance of the spatial aspect of geostatistical data, coin what I've referred and I've already mentioned before, the regionalized variable. This variable possess two key points, and we will see how this tie perfectly with our approach to the conversion. They have two aspects, a random aspect that is considered the mean, and we will see this later on, and a random aspect. So we basically are talking about the possibility to calculate the value of a regionalized variable using these two properties. Now, one concept that is very important when people might get a little bit confused, I will try to explain very, very, very basically. When we are talking about statistics, we are talking about random variable, which is, and with random variable, we mean a variable that can take any value inside a given distribution. In the regionalized variable, the position where we are trying to calculate as also an impact. And we will see how we can calculate in a minute. Now, I have spoken already about regionalized data. Here is an example, and you will see for a couple of other slides some similar graphic. Fundamentally, geostatistics has always been challenged because it's not very simple to be understood. So there is an experiment that is called the Millet field case study, where using with real data, the millet, we basically measure the yield of a millet field. We validate the geophysical, the geostatistical concept, and we will see in a minute how. Now, let's assume that we are in the millet field, and we want to calculate the yield at a given point. You can see on the left-hand side there is a map with real data, and we can draw three lines, A, B, C, and we can try to infer or calculate the value of the millet at the X1, X2, and X3 position. Now, how we can do that? We have already explained that you need to combine a structural component with a more random component. And basically, this is the formula where you can do that. Fundamentally, the value of a regionalized variable can be calculated summing or subtracting a mean from a residual. That is as simple as that. In the lower part of the slide, you can see the same line that are drawn in the map. And in the red is the value that correspond to the millet yield along the line. And you can see, like, if you want to calculate in X1, it would be simply the mean minus the residual, and so on, so on, so on. Now, again, I owe you an apologies because it's an oversimplification of geostatistics. But the point that you have to remember is that the geostatistics, because of the way that is constructed and the way that we can use to assess a Earth variable, it lends itself perfectly to geostatistics, to depth conversion and volume assessment. Simply because in the depth conversion, we will have an average that is basically our velocity field, and then we have a residual that comes from our mistie at the well. If we combine this information in a geostatistical framework, we have everything to solve our problem with the GRV. In particular, the capturing of the uncertainties. Now, another quick concept. that you need to know. We have talked about the combination of the random aspect and the structure aspect, which is a mean. The mean has to be described in terms of stationarity. We might have a mean that is constant and that is similar to itself everywhere. It means that is stationary, or we might introduce a trend, which means that it's not stationary. These concepts are very useful to understand how the kriging solution is calculated. Now, I'm running a little bit out of time, so I will accelerate a little bit. Hopefully, you will forgive me for this. Now, again, another concept. When we are dealing with geostatistics, we are dealing with the variogram. We need a variogram. We need a model that allowed us to understand the similarity between points in a given space. Now, again, I won't explain how to calculate the semi-variogram. What you need to remember is that the variogram is defined by three critical points. The nugget, which is basically this point here, it tells you what is the noise in the system. It tells you more, but let's assume that this is what it does. Then we have a range that is the maximum distance where two different points in the space are still correlated. And then we have the seal. The seal is nothing more than the variance of the system. Once you reach the seal, basically you cannot make prediction of one point given the others. Now, let me see, it's not moving. Why it's not moving? Here we are. Now, if we combine all of these concepts that I have explained very, very quickly, we can have our reality, and we are trying to replicate our reality, but we sample our reality. So if we input our data in our geostatistical engine, what we will end up is with an estimation. Now you can immediately see that the estimation will be lower frequency than the reality, and that is the other problem with that we are constantly facing in subsurface, because we use a seismic that is lower in which is band limited, and therefore we are losing some frequency that that belongs to the reality. Now, the beauty of geostatistics is not only it produces an estimation, but it can also produce an estimation error, which is basically the delta between our estimation and the reality. Now, without adding any other complication, if you want to summarize everything in a slide, fundamentally we have our reality, we sample with our data, we generate our best estimation, which is the kriging, and then if you remember what I have just explained, if we combine our kriging with our estimation of the error, we can produce the simulation, which is very close in frequency to the reality. And this is probably conclude the part of the geostatistic. Now, how all these concepts can come to our help to help us in terms of geostatistics. If you can see here, this is this line throughout this map from left to right. You can see that you have a lot of line. The two red lines are the P10, P90 depth interval, and in blue, even if it is not super clear, this is the kriging solution, which is the best estimation that we can produce for depth. Everything else are the realization that we can produce combining kriging and our estimation of the residue of the error. Now, why this is very important? Because there is another concept that you should remember, that depth and GRV are not linearly related. So you cannot take the best estimation and multiply directly into the GRV calculation. You have to go through the realization. So you take your realization, you calculate the GRV, and you have your distribution. This distribution in GRV will inform your the decision that you want to take in progressing your project. Now, the beauty of the geostatistic comes with the realization. The realization can be interrogated. You can calculate the probability of being above a given contact, and it's very simple math. You have to divide the realization above a given contact, divide the number of the total number, and you can understand where it would be the highest chance to have a trap. And then you can also start playing with the thickness of average thickness of the reservoir, which can provide information for the drilling campaign. Now, in summary, geostatistics is a branch of statistics focused on analyzing, modeling, and predict spatial correlated data. A key concept is the regionalized variable that, and we have explained, I hope that in order to calculate the value of a regionalized variable, you have to leverage on two aspects, one a random aspect and the other one a more structured aspect, that in the case of the kriging and the conversion is the average. Kriging is a predict technique that we use in geostatistics and rely on stationarity. Every kriging model need to understand if we are applying stationarity or not, and so on. Realization are very important because they have a higher frequency than the kriging, which is 10 to the mean, and fundamentally they can be interrogated. So far, I tried to explain the problem, I tried to suggest a solution, but now I would really like to show you where the geostatistics should operate. First of all, what should do? Should, as we have explained so far, we should operate in the depth domain, we should produce our depth conversion, use geostatistics. Using this, we will be able to assess the uncertainty in the estimation and the geography. Using this information along the various realization, we will be able to take our decision as far as our evaluation, development, and so on. Now, I would really like, if you remember, I asked you to remember one slide. This is the second, in my opinion, is critical. You can see on the top various realization in depth, and you can see on the bottom how the red area is the area that it result of a given contact. You can see that, or maybe you cannot clearly, but the concept here is very clear. Minor change in depth might result in bigger change in volumetric. And how we are able to capture that? In order to do that, we have to be very good at capturing all the uncertainty to produce a range of depth solution that can inform decision about the volumetric distribution. And in particular, we need to be able to capture the uncertainty, uncertainty, and the uncertainty that we're talking. If we are good at that, we will be able to calculate to retrieve information like the probability of success, volume of the spot, and we will be able to calculate our best estimation of that. Now, why we are going to do that? We have already explained that the money is king, but fundamentally we need to, if we apply geostatistics, we do apply geostatistics because we want to be predictive in depth. We have historically success of 99% of our prediction being inside the distribution that we forecasted before drilling. And if you have that information, again, you can inform your exploration strategy, your infilling, and your development. Now, where we should use geostatistics, we should use for every depth conversion, but in particular, it's very good if we are dealing with multi-stack formation, if we are dealing with a different compartment, and fundamentally, lately, we can also handle vertical, but also directional and horizontal wells. Now, the how. I have explained the benefit, but how we should do, how we should apply geostatistics to volumetric assessment and calculation. Fundamentally, we need to calculate all the sources of uncertainty in the acquiring data, in the interpret data, and also the load that we use to deconvert. Then we need to use a global approach. We cannot just use one layer by layer. We have to have a solution that is global. And finally, we need to validate. Many times in my career, I was told that things didn't make sense in a dynamic space, we should have the ability to find the sweet spot between our velocity uncertainty, interpretation uncertainty, and our dynamic data uncertainty. If we are able to do that, bingo, everything that we will convert, we will be dynamically friendly, if you know what I'm trying to say. So in order to apply geostatistic to that conversion and the volumetric calculation, all the element has to be present. Now, I'm probably running out of time a little bit. I will accelerate this phase. Fundamentally, this part, so far we have seen the problem, we have seen the possible solution, and I explained just now how the solution should be implemented. Now, let's try to see why it's important from a decision point of view. Now, we usually, and this is applied to GRV calculation, but it's a broad concept. What we usually do, we take our data, we interpret, we build a model, and we calibrate. And throughout the process, we are trying to capture the uncertainty. And at the end, we look at the result. Fundamentally, we have several problems. That is based on my personal experience, but also based on the Seisquare experience. We usually use two simplistic mathematical models, both for building our model as well as for the propagation of uncertainty. We never are able to analytically assess the uncertainty, and usually we resort to this is plus or minus, which is not good enough. And then usually when we try to propagate, we are using workflow that are too complex, and when we realize that they are too complex, we end up picking up three random high, low, and mid without sometimes knowing the distribution, which expose us to the risk that we are biased either toward the high or toward the low end of the evaluation. Now, again, running through these slides, I would really like you to remember one thing, that problem in the geophysical space come from the fact that usually the velocity that we use are not focusing and they are not detailed enough for their conversion, mostly because we use a velocity that are built for imaging, for seismic imaging. So if you see this slide, if you have a look to this slide, fundamentally we should be able to capture the uncertainty around our velocity model, assuming that the velocity model is a physical one and is not a processing one. The moment that you calibrate, you move the uncertainty space, and if you start sampling this new space, you will see that it doesn't overlap 100% to the space where you should be. Now, what all this problem might, let me rephrase. We have seen that how we should approach our decision analysis. We have seen that the process might be broken. What are the implications? Again, I have already mentioned this before, but fundamentally, when we try to propagate the uncertainty, it becomes too complex. The estimation is affected, mostly because we are not able to analytically assess the uncertainty, which is really a philosophical concept most of the time, because the moment that you have an answer, you no longer have an uncertainties. And the other thing is we are very selective in where we explore our uncertainty. We either doing the data, we probably forget the interpretation sometimes, and very often we tend to forget that also the law that the mathematical law we use come with uncertainty. So what the perfect decision should look like? It should be reliable. It should handle uncertainty. We should be able again to derive all the uncertainty from the data we have. It has to be automatically propagated. We need to propagate that automatically. That is what I mean. It has to be fast. Now, how we can solve that? We can solve again with geostatistics. We can have approach that are called Bayesian. We can have a global solution. We can incorporate all the sources of uncertainty and all the layer that we have identified throughout our geophysical analysis. If we are able to do this, again, we are informed decision that cost million. We will be able to understand the distribution of the uncertainty, the risk, and the distribution of our volumes. I'm almost finished. I would really like to highlight one thing. Usually, and that is back to the broken chain of how we handle our mathematical approach, we tend to use a layer cake approach. We deconvert the first layer, we calibrate, and so on. And I hope that if you remember the slides that I have just shared a few minutes ago, I hope that at least I have provided you with the idea that this is not ideal. And geostatistics can help that through Bayesian approach to get into a global solution that consider all the uncertainty and all the input. So finally, and this is more for information, if we are able to properly capture the structure component and we combine with the property component that I didn't mention during this presentation, we will be able to have distribution of uncertainty, volume, we will have the ability to understand the risk and the distribution of our either GRV or in place. Once we have a distribution, we will be able to interrogate, we will be able to extract point that capture distribution, but we will also be able to interrogate the realization, understanding even more what we need to understand. Now, so far we have seen everything. I would like to conclude in the next 2 minutes with a real case study that I work on in Australia. Now, the field is located in Cooper, in western flank of Cooper Basin. It is an oil discovery. It was discovered in 2012, and the challenge here was that the volumetric were always challenging. So they started the exploration, and the field became bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, you can see that at the moment, even if there are a lot of horizontal wells and there have been a lot of historical production, we still in the space where we need to capture the uncertainty. Historically, it has been done multi-deterministically, and I have explained before that probably might be no ideal. What we wanted to do here, it was very simple. We wanted to validate the geostatistical approach. So the challenge here was that throughout the history of the production, the appraisal, and to the production, the field kept becoming bigger and bigger, and we wanted to understand that if we used a geostatistical approach, we could have taken better decision as far as the development of the field. So we start from scratch. We just use on the right hand side, you can see the map of all the wells. For this exercise, we decide to position ourselves at the end of the exploration campaign. So we use only the vertical well to predict area that at that time, the point in time, were not drilled. So we did our geostatistical approach. We assess the uncertainty in the time interpretation, in the velocity. We combine everything in our Bayesian scheme, and then we produce the most likely depth map, the Kriging solution. Now, which input do we use? The standard input that every geophysicist uses for the depth conversion. We have our well top, we have our geophysical velocity law, we have our interpretation, we have our seismic velocity, and then for polygon and so on. Using all these input and using our approach, we were able to understand the connectivity of different closure, the distribution of the volumetrics, the probability that one of being above or below a given contact, and also we had the depth prognosis and the best estimation in depth with all the realization. Now, I have explained so far that we just use a subset of wells just to understand if geostatistics could have improved the understanding of the distribution of the volume, resulting in a better appraisal campaign. And actually, the result was very, very good, because only using the well in this space, we were able to understand that there were areas that were 100% above a given contact, even before the drilling validated the area. And finally, we also had a better understanding of the distribution of the thickness of the reservoir. Now, I'm almost concluded. One thing that this exercise was very, very good because we had a lot of data and we managed to validate the statistics. So we saw that 31% of the data were outside our P10, P90, but they were still inside the distribution, and 100% of the distribution of the wells outside the one that we use, of course, were inside the P1, P99. We had two horizons, two different layers, and the statistic was very, very, as expected. It was very, very good. So finally, at the end, we were able to, even if we use a subset of the wells, were aligned with the tree map that I showed before. So finally, we basically back engineering the study. We had a population of data that were stochastically or statistically robust, and we tried to see if applying geostatistics would have been beneficial for the development of the field. And the results were extremely good because we were able to capture the GRV distribution with a subset of the wells, and we were able to predict all the other wells inside the distribution, a statistical distribution. So I apologize because I have run like crazy, but I have reached the end of my presentation. I hope that I have been able to articulate the problem that we face with the estimation of the uncertainty in GRV. I propose a solution that is called geostatistic. Hopefully, this makes sense also from a decisional analysis point of view. And I have tried to support the application of geostatistics with the millet example, as well as with an example, a subsurface example located in the Cooper Basin. And with this, I have reached the end of my speech. Thanks a lot for your time, and I'm here for your questions.
Thanks, Alessandro. Thank you. That was you did a great job encapsulating a lot of information in the few minutes you had, man. This is a complex topic, and as you say, you just scratched the surface. So
Yeah,
well done
nothing
on
more than that.
encapsulating a lot of stuff. So um, great stuff. I'm going to open up the Q&A for the next few minutes we have. If you want to actually verbally ask, just hit that little hand icon at the bottom and just go away with your question. Otherwise, just you can just type your question in the chat screen. I'll read it out loud. I actually have a couple of questions myself, if you don't mind, Alessandro.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of questions actually. The first one is on a general note, not specific to geostatistics or your presentation in particular, but I want to um, pick your brains from your exposure and your experience in the digital transformation space and AI workflows. So look, I mean, I remember when I started out in the early 2000s. I remember the ant tracking was the big buzzword in seismic
Yeah,
interp back then, right? And I'm sure over the years you've seen quite a few transformational quote unquote
yeah.
techniques come and go. So I wanted to ask you, you being at the forefront of digital transformation, where do you see the industry heading, especially under the light of the incredible development we're seeing in the AI and machine learning space? So more specifically in the seismic to reservoir modeling space. So what's your take on where we are and where things are heading?
That is a wonderful question. It's a bit out of the topic of the GRV, but thanks for asking, Alan. Now, it's difficult for me to answer this question because you are constantly have evolution daily, fundamentally. The area where I do believe that the easiest and the low-hanging fruit is in data mining. So we tend to forget that our industry use as a thousand of data that we don't use. In particular, I'm referring to presentation, report. So having a structure, and they are coming. They were a bit immature when I started in Petronas in 2016, so about 9, 10 years ago. Now they are data mining using machine learning and AI and machine learning, it's extremely advanced. That is the area where the easiest gain can be made. In terms of subsurface interpretation, it might be limited, because at the end of the day, whatever you do, you need a SME that check the quality of the interpretation. Let me conclude, you know these things better than I do, Alan. If you let ChatGPT to do a task, it can be very fast, it can be very precise, but you need to check, because and then is when you need an SME, and that is exactly the same in subsurface characterization.
Okay, now that's good. That's interesting. Yeah, I thought it would be more AI workflows embedded in the most recent seismic inter workflows and geomodeling space, but I think it's still too early.
No, you can. There are people that are trying. You can define, but now the large language model, they might revolutionize that as well. But in general, what I have seen in the last 5 years is people that become more precise in picking their fault and their horizon. There is no, and the salt bodies. An improve of precision, I haven't seen something that blow out of my shoes in terms of saying, look, this is extremely innovative.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good, man. Second question. I don't see any questions in the chat and nobody's raising the hand, so I'm just gonna go ahead with the second question that I had. This is more on topic. Um, if I understood you correctly in the case study you shared with us, you went back in time and
Yeah,
performed an assessment of your workflow to see what things would have been back then,
correct,
understanding that
correct,
this is a mature field, a lot of wells, a lot of production, and if I understood you correctly, the volume needed to be continually adjusted as the development progressed,
correct,
right?
correct,
So this is different from applying geostatistical workflows in the static modeling stage into dynamic modeling stage. And the question that I
correct.
have is, obviously when you are in the static modeling stage, you can have hundreds or
Mm,
thousands of realizations and run distributions on your
mhm.
volumes or whatever. But then you need to go into the dynamic modeling stage when you have
Yeah.
production data, and perform a history matching exercise on a single realization is already hard enough.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you whether you have ever seen, a
Yes, I
meaningful
did.
workflow from static all the way to
Yeah,
dynamic, including that feedback loop from
I did.
dynamic into the geostatistical workflows.
Yes, yes. I don't remember all the detail, but yes. In Johan Zerdrup, what we did was we produced 2,000 static realization, combining a multi-deterministic approach in Petrel, and we validated that no with the classical approach, but we have DST. So basically, what we were able to do, we were able to filter the distribution coming from the 2000 static model through the dynamic data coming from the DST. I don't have an example where I match the production, but the principle is the same. Fundamentally, what you have to do is you have to start with your in-place distribution and filter by the dynamic, as you said. Tools exist. I cannot mention because I do not remember, but tools exist to do this type of flow. They are intensive, but they are very successful at the end, in my experience.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, mate. I think we're just about out of time. Okay, Michael raised his hand. Go ahead, Michael. You can unmute yourself and just take it away, mate.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alessandro. That's very interesting. I thought I'd just pick up on the last question. And I certainly have seen a scenario using, was actually Rockstar enable Tempest More,
Yeah,
doing a big loop where
yeah,
we took something like what ended up being 20 static models and history matched over 500
yeah,
reservoir simulation models on existing production data. And I guess the point that came out of it there's two things that come out of that. A lot of those models were completely unphysical. And I guess the question, the point is, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And a lot more thought needs to go into the limits and the ranges of variables you put in.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the key things that I've learned from the new generation of modeling software. Really does allow you to do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah. We are back to the Michael. We are back to the ChatGPT discussion.
Question. Yeah, exactly. And what happens is you end up with individuals who go, "Hey, just because I can do this, let's do this."
Yeah.
And you really shouldn't, because all you do is chew up your computing time, and then you end up with answers, and you don't know which is the right one, or the right range. In fact, in this sense, so that whole exercise I referred to had to be redone with the right filters, and that pull everything down to what was actually physically possible. And it was all about range selection and the way the
in my opinion, there are two ways to handle, and that is the way that I handle in the past with people that had a strong background in uncertainty propagation. You have to understand the distribution, but you have to sample the distribution.
Yes.
So when you approach this type of problem that are very complex, I believe that the multi-deterministic approach is the best, as long as your sampling of the distribution is correct. Because with the multi-deterministic, you are in control of the geology fundamentally. You cannot, geostatistic works, but as you said, Michael, you have to set the dependency very well. In my opinion, the best of the best is understanding the distribution using geostatistical approach, sampling using the multi-deterministic, and make sure that the assumption that build that multi-deterministic are correct.
Cool. I thought I just wanted to give one more piece of kudos.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupt you, Michael.
No, it was good. No, you didn't. It's good. I was just going to say one more thing is that I love the fact you identify that the GRV and the structures, they are the things that we get wrong the most. I think this has the biggest impact on what we do.
Yeah. But you know, Michael, I have been, I feel terrible to say this because everybody is going around to say we do this better, no? And that is not usually my attitude, but at least a couple of, probably more of time, I have seen that using geostatistical approach, we were able to explain why a well was dry, simply because it means the highest probability of finding the structure. And unfortunately, and this become a little bit philosophical perhaps, our job, in exploration at least, is very forgiving, because we are playing with many parameters and we can always blame the migration instead of the structure, if you see what I'm trying to say, Michael.
I do. Grand.
Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for that. It's already past 5 o'clock here. So again, thank you very much, Alessandro. Thanks, Michael, for the question, and thank you everyone again for joining us today in this launch, our first webinar of the series. Unfortunately, we didn't have too many people. We had more than 48 registered, but we'll see how we go in subsequent ones. So we're just about out of time. About the bonus, don't you worry. I have your email addresses if you're here, so you'll be receiving something shortly from me by email. I think that's a wrap for today. Thank you, everyone, and cheers.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alessandro.
Bye-bye.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you.